How's it going, everybody? Today, I want to take a minute to talk about traditionalism, or rather, the lack thereof. So, if you're unaware with the trad or traditionalist movement, it is essentially a right wing dominated movement that aims to promote familial and Christian values. It's typically aimed towards young men, encouraging them to get married and start a family, as well as follow a life that embodies these Christian traditional right wing values. Now, I don't think that there's anything wrong with this. I don't even think it's a bad thing. I think that the more people that do get married and have children, the better for society, especially considering the fact that we are in a state of population decline. Encouraging young people to reproduce is honestly a really positive idea and an overall net benefit. Unfortunately, however, the trad movement has been corrupted by grifters, foreign influence, and various other bad faith actors. So today, we're going to be taking a look at some of the scandals that have unfolded over the past few months involving Elijah Schaffer and Sarah Stock, as well as a lot of the other Twitter or X accounts that aim to promote these trad or right wing values as a whole. Now, before we jump into the topic at hand, I think it's important to give a brief overview of where this all started. Obviously, the trad movement is not anything that is new. However, I think around the late 2010s and early 2020s, the movement exploded on social media. It gained a lot of traction with the whole return to tradition, aesthetics, trad wife phenomena, alongside a plethora of other traditionally orientated content. Now, at first, this seemed to be pretty innocent. It appeared to be comprised of primarily Catholics who were pushing these trad values. They wanted to see young people get married, have families, and live a life that would ultimately prioritize positive familial Christian values. It seemed that the overall goal was to rejuvenate the family based society. Now, unfortunately, however, it didn't take long for grifters to take advantage and hijack the movement due to the fact that this content was exploding in popularity, especially amongst the young men. And the reason why I think this is because of the timing that all of this occurred. You have to take into account the fact that this whole era of the early 2020s was a period of mass awakening for many right wingers or center right idealists. And this could largely be attributed to the fact that we are experiencing COVID lockdowns, mass unemployment, and an overall decrease in mental health, especially amongst young people. I think this drove people to pursue a more right wing, politically focused ideology. Now, obviously, I think there are other key factors that drove men to the right wing, such as the collapse of the dating market, hoflation, as well as the emergence of Andrew Tate, who led the charge when it came to red pilling the youth, waking up a lot of young men to the reality of how the world works. I could make a whole video on this topic, but for now, I'm just going to go ahead and leave it at that. So, where do the problems with traditionalism lie? Well, I think it's important to distinguish the different facets of the grift. The first exposition of the fraud within the trad movement started with Twitter's unintended expose of account activity geolocation, when we ended up seeing that a lot of the accounts that pushed the whole trad right wing MAGA values ended up being based in foreign countries such as Nigeria, Russia, Thailand, India, of course. I mean, you get the point. Now, I don't know about you, but whenever I interacted with these accounts and their content, I had always imagined it was like some right wing American guy who just wanted to promote conservative ideals, spread a positive message, and just maybe create a sense of community within the movement. Unfortunately, most of these accounts were likely bot farms, and they promoted the content for a variety of reasons. I'm going to assume primarily to make a shit ton of money, because what you found pretty often was that these accounts ran ads and sold merch. Obviously, there could be more sinister reasons behind these accounts. Maybe they were working on behalf of a foreign government to sow division between people. I mean, at the end of the day, who really knows? It's all speculation. Now, another scandal I think has really shaken the trad movement to its core is the whole Elijah Schaffer Sarah Stock scandal. If you're not familiar with who these people are, I honestly don't blame you, but I'm just going to go ahead and provide you with some brief context, just so you kind of know what I'm talking about. So Elijah Schaffer is a right wing commentator. He started off his career at the Blaze TV, and he hosted a show called Slightly Offensive, which is essentially just a conservative talk show where he discussed relevant news surrounding the culture war, typically giving a based, edgy commentary. The whole shtick was that it was an offensive talk show, if you couldn't tell by the name. And obviously, a show like this gained a lot of traction, especially amongst young right wing men. Since then, Elijah had gone on to form his own company called Rift TV, where he does essentially the same thing with more of a trad undertone. Now, this is where we see Sarah Stock come into the picture. Sarah was an employee for Elijah and claimed to embody the whole trad calf, trad wife values. She said she was a virgin waiting till marriage and that she heavily opposed premarital intercourse. I'm going to go ahead and leave a link down below to the Whatever podcast where she discusses her beliefs in more depth. However, after the scandal unfolded, I think it's clear as day she's just another e-girl. Many such cases, but that's just kind of how the ball rolls. The scandal at hand involves an extramarital affair between both Elijah and Sarah. I'm sure you could have deduced this by this point in the video. Unfortunately, however, most people within the trad right-wing movement never saw this coming. Now, according to leaked text and audio messages on X from Milo Yiannopoulos, the affair started around 2025, which makes sense considering February 2025 is when CPAC 2025 took place. Now, if you're unfamiliar with CPAC, it stands for Conservative Political Action Conference, and it is essentially a meet and greet where right wing influencers get together to discuss the culture war, meet with fans, take pictures, sign autographs. I'm sure you get the idea. Now, the allegations surrounding the affair are pretty scandalous. I don't want to get too far into it because it'll take up a lot of time, but if you do want to do some research, I'll leave the links down below so you can see everything that was discussed. And for the sake of my own reputation, I don't want to go around alleging things that either may or may not be true, but I highly advise you to take a look as well as pause the video because I did leave some screenshots for you guys to see in the meantime. Now, I think the reason why this scandal shook the trad movement so deeply to its core is largely because of the people who were involved in this scandal, that being Elijah and Sarah. Now, these are both people who claim to promote Christian right wing trad familial values, and they're also people who are married with children. Well, at least Elijah is. I'm not sure about Sarah, I'd have to check on that, but this is not to say that either of these people are necessarily bad or evil people. I think that at the end of the day, they're just people like you and me who made a pretty big mistake. Regardless, that doesn't detract from the fact that this will have a lasting effect on the trad movement, as well as the many people who consider themselves fans or avid consumers of their content, let alone their own families who at the end of the day are the true victims of the scandal. I couldn't even imagine how devastating it must be for both of their families to have to go through this, especially Sarah's husband. Like, oh, dude, like that's just so cooked. Now, I want to talk about the X accounts that are pushing a right-wing MAGA trad narrative that aren't really seeming to be who they say they are. So recently, Twitter came out with a geolocation feature that displays the countries of origins for Twitter accounts, and it allows users to see where their creators are posting from, as well as where the accounts originated from. Now, unfortunately, this did quite a bit of damage to the trad movement in the sense that it exposed a lot of the key players as being based in foreign nations. Now, the reason I say this is a problem is because these accounts pretended to be pro-MAGA, pro-white, pro-right-wing American ideologues, when in reality, they're grifting for a variety of reasons. I mean, at the end of the day, who really knows what those reasons are? I'm sure that people running these accounts made a shit ton of money, but I'm curious to know whether or not this was a coordinated effort, possibly led by foreign operatives or governments, like I mentioned before. Maybe they wanted to sow division between Americans, increase political and racial tension, just to cause more disdain between the parties, between Americans. Who really knows? I mean, regardless, at the end of the day, political violence is at an all time high, with the murder of Charlie Kirk as well as the United Healthcare CEO, not to mention the deaths of Alex Preddy and Renee Good, which have been painted as an attack on Americans. I feel like this leads a lot of people, primarily leftoids, to become more hysterical, extreme, and just overall violent. So, what's the point of me sharing this information with you? Well, like I said in the beginning, it's not to try to discredit the trad or right wing movement as an ideology, or rather to even make the claim that aligning yourself with the trad movement is wrong. I mean, I consider myself to be a pretty right wing guy. Like I said, I think embodying trad values is honestly a net positive for society. What it is to say, however, is that you should not be relying on these influencers to create or defend your ideology to the fullest extent. Whether that be a political or a personal ideology, you should always take what everybody says with a grain of salt, including myself. I think that listening to these influencers can be a really great tool at helping you guide yourself towards finding good information as leverage for creating a political base or opinion, but it should not be the end all be all. Because at the end of the day, everybody's in this for a reason, whether that be political capital. Maybe they want to get elected into a position of power. Perhaps they want to amass a large amount of followers and have their claim to fame on the internet. Maybe they just want to make a bunch of money. Now, obviously, these three benefits kind of tie into each other, but I do want to hear what you guys have to say about this topic. So if you wouldn't mind leaving a comment down below, feel free to let me know what you think. Tell me if I missed something, if you believe I'm wrong about anything discussed, or if you agree with the overall sentiment of this video. Now, if you made it this far, I do want to say thank you for watching, and until next time, it was great talking with you.